You are seen. You are worthy. You are not alone. The world loses one person to suicide every 40 seconds. Let's change the stats. Together, we can say not suicide. Not today.
Fraternities. Every college has some. Maybe you who are listening are a fraternity member. But there are things that happens behind the closed doors that are always kept secret. So what happens when a fraternity member decides to look into something and it turns into more than what he bargained for? It turned into exposing some secrets? You write a book about it. Join me as I talk with author Max Marshall on this episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.
Welcome to True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People, the podcast where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction, and reminding you that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. Here is your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. All right, before we dive in with today's guests, as always, I remind you that if you are in a situation where you feel like hurting yourself or hurting someone else, please do us all a favor. Call 988 or text that number. Your life is valuable and nothing in this world is worth it, and I do care. Also, your trigger warnings today: if you are sensitive to crimes that deal either with Greek life, which is fraternities, or drugs, this may not be the episode for you. And we do understand. All right, so if you look at the calendar, it is time for another author. Let me tell you who I got for you today. He is a writer and journalist. He's raised in Texas and he attended Columbia University, where he graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa in 2016. He served as a Princeton and Asia Media Fellow in Hanoi, Vietnam, and his work has appeared in GQ, Texas Monthly, Sports Illustrated, and the New York Times. He arrived on the campus of the College of Charleston in 2018, originally intended to investigate a small-time trafficking ring, but as he started reporting, it became clear that the scope of the crimes was far bigger than what was made public. Several student deaths, a nationwide trafficking network, and the seizure of $21 million worth of black market Xanax. He is the author of Among the Bros, a Fraternity Crime Story. Please welcome author Max Marshall. Max, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, David.
It is an honor, man. This is, we're going to dive into your book. It is a doozy. Before we do, is there anything else that you would like us to know about Max Marshall that was not covered in your intro?
No, I mean, that was great. And it sounded especially good in your baritone. Makes me want to talk even deeper, sort of really dip in. I think my voice feels very high right now. But no, yeah, I'm excited to just talk among the bros.
All right, man. Well, let's dive in. I guess the first question that comes off top of my mind when I was approached about this book and I started reading it, for one, I couldn't put it down. I think I haven't quite finished it yet because it was so compelling that several parts I had to go back and reread because I couldn't believe what I was reading.
That's right.
Greek life is very private. And I actually did watch Bama Rush, which if you saw that one, is about women that was pledging to high fraternities in Alabama.
Yeah.
And the producers even threatened, and so were some of the women, that if they said certain things, the machine would come after them.
Yeah.
Being that they're guarded, this is kind of a tell-all book. You show us sides of Greek life that we've heard about, but really never confirmed. Why did you write this book at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Greek life and I was in college at the same time as basically everyone in this book. So from 2012 to 2016. And a lot of what got me writing it was basically based around what I had seen myself in college. So for instance, I had seen a lot of Xanax. I thought of Xanax when I got to school as an anti-anxiety drug for maybe, a plane flight or a panic attack, but turns out it's actually a massive party drug, especially in Greek life. I had friends who dealt, I had friends who were using, got addicted. So I really just set out to look at Xanax and fraternities. It was a pretty small goal in the beginning. And it was so small that I really just Googled Xanax bust fraternity. And the first result was this small article about the Charleston, Kappa Alpha order in SAE 2 chapters. And it said they got caught with 44,000 Xanax pills. But then I did some more reporting, and a defense lawyer let it slip. It was actually closer to 3 million pills. And everything kind of started to spin out from there. And like you said, then student deaths and a murder and a nationwide trafficking network and all sorts of other stuff. But really I kind of felt like I had grown up in this closed bubble. Like you said, it's a very private world, but I'd seen a lot of it. And I was pretty shocked by what I saw. And I was even more shocked by what I saw when I started reporting.
So being that, you are in the sorority, once in, always in, have you gotten any kind of backlash from anyone that's read your book about exposing some of these things?
Yeah, as a fraternity guy, it's funny. If you're in the bubble, the weird secret of fraternities is they actually love to talk about it to other people in the bubble. So, if you ask a fraternity guy about his hazing and you weren't in a fraternity, they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then if you were in a fraternity, you'd be like, oh, bro, I got, tased with the cattle prod and, I had to do a double horseshoe of dip spit in my mouth every night or whatever it is. And people love to kind of share these stories. And so on one level, after an amount of time and you sort of earn the right trust, people were very forthcoming. But then, once the book started to come out, some fraternities reached out with their lawyers. That was definitely a thing, kind of trying to scare, HarperCollins from publishing the book. And then I do think there might have been a bit of a Goodreads slander campaign of these fraternity guys all going on and writing mean reviews. Although, I, for the sake of my own mental health, stopped reading those pretty quickly. There was one that was something like, the only thing worse than this dumb book is the ugly author photo in the back. And I was like, okay, I probably shouldn't read this. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people, and, you saw it with Bama Rush as well, who would they want this to remain secret forever, because it really is a very powerful sort of secret society that explains a lot of power in this country. And of course, there are going to be people who want to keep that sort of thing under wraps.
So speaking of powerful, I want to tell the audience this, because I don't think a lot of us, I kind of did, but I don't think a lot of us understand just how powerful fraternities are.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to financial. I think you capsulated perfectly in chapter 2 of your book, where you wrote, while only 2% of America's population is involved in fraternities, 80% of Fortune 500 executives, 76% of U.S. senators and congressmen, 85% of Supreme Court justices, and all but 2 presidents since 1825 have been fraternity men. Less publicized, but just as wild is this fact. Greek alumni give approximately 75% of all money donated to universities. Did you think that's why they get away with certain things, or maybe some people look the other direction? Because I didn't know that number of big, powerful people were actually in fraternities.
Definitely. I mean, and it's funny, for all the talk of, the Illuminati or the Knights Templar or whatever it is, the Freemasons, really, if you want to look at the sort of secret society that funnels a lot of American power, it is the Greek life. And it's not even that hidden. Greek life from the beginning started as a way of basically being a drinking club for rich kids. Like in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, only wealthy students went to American universities. Then in the late 1800s or mid 1800s, sort of middle-class students started showing up. And basically the guys from, New York and Connecticut and sort of these old, blue blood families are like, well, we don't want to drink with these guys. What are we going to do? And so they basically were like, okay, well, what if we started these sort of clubs and we gave it this sort of, mythical underpinning, Greek letters, initiation ceremonies. But ultimately, it started as just a way of creating a separate campus. And that's definitely continued all the way through today. You'll find fraternities that have $1 million social budgets for 1 year. You'll find sororities that do zip code checks, basically to make sure that their members are coming from the right areas. And certainly, I think it makes sense. If you're a college administrator, one of your main jobs is to raise money for the school, grow the endowment. And why would you ever want to cut off that spigot? Why would you want to get rid of these organizations that bring in so much wealth to your school and bring, wealthy students back for alumni stuff? So yeah, I think it's an incredibly powerful reason these fraternities don't really get in trouble. And then you add to that, when you're wealthy, you can, hire the best lawyers and, insurance people and, just even an alumnus who just comes in and pays to, oh, you burned down a log cabin? Okay, well, we can pay for that, which is something that also happens in chapter 2. But yeah, so I think it's a lot of things.
So I have to ask, because I've heard this and I've seen, at least what I think I'm seeing. So being that you are, an expert on this, is there racism in sororities, or is there just picks? Because when you watch these shows like Bama Rush, I think I saw one girl that was African American, but even she was mixed. But when you get up to the higher level of Greek life, you see a lot of just nothing but white people. Do they pick that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. For instance, KA and SAE, the two fraternities that I spend the most time writing about in the book, they were both founded in the 1860s in this deep South, right when the Civil War ended. And KA was really explicit about this. They saw themselves as basically continuing this sort of mythology and spirit of the Confederacy after the fall of the South and the Civil War. And their spiritual founder is Robert E. Lee. And if you look at their documents from especially the 1920s, they really saw themselves as sharing a purpose with the KKK. They said, basically the KKK does by force what we do by educating young men from good families. And of course, that's not the case anymore. You don't meet KAs who think they're doing the same thing as the KKK. And I think a lot of people, they don't think about that stuff at all when they join a fraternity. I mean, ultimately, you're talking about 18-year-old kids, but these things do have a momentum of their own, right? They're still learning that Robert E. Lee is the perfect gentleman. They call him the last white knight. They still give a toast to him every year with a glass of what they call pure water, just clear water. And so, yeah, I'd say, I would never say that every member, even most members of a fraternity, are individually racist, but I do think these things have histories that kind of create this momentum, right? And I do think it's not a coincidence that there are, especially in the Deep South chapters, that are still 100% white. I've even heard stories of, fraternities wanting to recruit non-white members and the alumni basically stepping in and being like, no, if you want our money, you got to keep it the way it was. And so, yeah, it's obviously, like America itself, there's just the weight of all this history behind everything. And you can't really understand what's going on now until you study it.
And I will throw this out there. Yes, I do know that all African-American colleges also has fraternities, and some of them are just as bad. So definitely. Yeah, I mean, some of the craziest hazing stories are the historically black fraternities. They do some wild stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's but forever, it's exactly what you're saying. There was sort of a separate but equal system with fraternities. There was the Panhellenic fraternities, and then there were the sort of historically black fraternities, and there wasn't, it was really two separate systems, even two separate organizing bodies. That is, I think that could easily change in the next 20 years. I mean, who knows? So when you went in to investigate the small-time trafficking ring, I'm assuming that the small-time trafficking was around drugs or black market Xanax at that time too as well?
Exactly. So yeah, they got caught with, I say small time, they got caught with, I think, officially, it was 12 pounds of weed, 1.5 pounds of cocaine, 44,000 Xanax pills, a few assault rifles, and a grenade launcher. So already, pretty big. But then it turned out that the police had confiscated, like I said, closer to 3 million pills, and it had never been publicized. And then, I found out that it was actually the murder of a student. On the first Friday of spring break, 2016, they found the student Patrick Moffley at his campus house, a block from the library. He was lying on the floor of his house. His body was surrounded by hundreds of these fake Xanax pills, and he was holding a Chipotle napkin to a bullet wound in his chest. And it was when the police started to ask, well, where did all these fake pills come from, that they started to sort of unravel the drug ring and, bring in the FBI, the DEA, the Postal Service. Another thing I learned doing this book is that a DEA agent told me the U.S. Postal Service is the biggest drug trafficker in the world, because it's quite easy to send drugs over the mail. And so, yeah, that's when students started kind of wearing wires on each other, and everything sort of got pretty crazy.
Yeah, I guess when somebody comes up dead, everybody starts wanting to cover their own butts at that point and start to talk about it. Then it wasn't just any kid, right? I guess he was the son of a major real estate developer.
Yeah, exactly. And his mom had run for Congress and was on the school board. So of course, all of a sudden, there's all this pressure, basically like, whoa, well, why don't we should probably look into this. But you're totally right that it does kind of go into cover your butt mode pretty quick, because one of his, he was lying there. He had just been shot, and the gunman had fled, and his roommates, who were also, to different degrees connected to this drug network. One, instead of helping Patrick, call 911 or try to put pressure on the bullet wound, he ran to a trash can to hide his Xanax pills. Another one took his Xanax pill off the ground next to Patrick and took it, and then went to hide his pills, tried to bury him in the backyard. Another was flushing his pills upstairs down the toilet, and it was only a guest who was there to buy some Xanax who even found the Chipotle napkin to try to save Patrick.
Well, you would think it'd be hard to get rid of all of that because, what you uncover is it was the largest college narcotic network ever.
Yeah.
I mean, they had pill presses. They're making their own stuff.
Yeah.
They even used pledges as mules.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really, when you zoom out, the entire system was pretty wild, right? So they were getting unpressed alprazolam powder. So that's the active ingredient in Xanax, from black market, dark web labs in China. And it would get shipped through Canada down to Charleston in printer cartridges. And they would hide the powder inside the cartridges. And then some of the guys in the network would rent these beach houses outside Charleston, a different beach house every month. And they would use an industrial pill press and make hundreds of thousands of pills. And, this pill press is just pounding pills kind of constantly. It's kicking up alprazolam dust everywhere. If you're not wearing a hazmat suit, the dust will get on you, and then you get what's called permabard, like a Xanax bar. You basically go into like a Xanax blackout. So you have to be wearing these suits and using these vacuums. And then they would make these pills, and they would either heat seal them inside Skittles bags, which made it look like it was just Skittles in a bag, but they would empty out the Skittles and put the pills inside, and they would ship them all over the US, or they would funnel them through the fraternity system, where, like you said, these fraternity pledges, which is like the 18-year-old freshmen who have to run errands for the older guys, they would basically, say, drive here, pick this up, don't look inside the bag, take it there, drop it off, etc. And they were shipping this stuff to fraternity houses all over the US and definitely around the Deep South.
My goodness. So,
yeah.
With the death, do you feel that if he wouldn't have been the son of somebody that was as prominent as his parents were, that this kind of would have got swept under the rug?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely put a lot of extra pressure, right? And, Patrick's family, obviously did everything they could to solve the murder. They hired a private investigator, and certainly they were meeting with the detectives as much as possible, and meeting with the FBI, and, just trying to get answers like any parent would. But of course, because of who they were and how, beloved and well-known they were in the community, I do think it made things happen a lot faster. And yeah, certainly I think if Patrick wasn't killed and there was no murder, the drug ring never would have gotten unraveled, because up to that point, really the only authorities that were around were sort of campus policemen with golf carts and flashlights, and they're not really equipped to, do basically what could have amounted to a pretty major RICO case if a prosecutor wanted to.
So just to give the numbers, I know you went over them, but just to make them accurate so that the audience can kind of grab how much of the stuff out there, you stated 1.5 pounds of cocaine, 24 pounds of marijuana, 7 firearms, a TAC-D grenade launcher, and over 3 million black market Xanax pills.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the number. What would just the Xanax pills be worth in street value at that time?
Well, so yeah, I mean, up to It's funny because the margins are great, right? So you can buy, if you're buying in true bulk and you're pressing your own pills, it might be a few cents a pill. But at the very back end, if you're selling to a student who doesn't really know what a price of a pill could be, I talk to people who talk people into paying $10 for a pill. But say it's, $5 a pill, that's about $17 million. So the street value is pretty massive.
So the most impressive thing to me, I don't remember the exact number. I think you said you had over 120 different interviews. You talked to a lot of people to write this book. A lot of them were ex-fraternity members who, of course, you didn't give their names. How did you get them to sit down and talk to you and want to expose these things?
Yeah, I mean, at first it was really hard. You're coming from out of town. I'm not from South Carolina. I grew up in Texas, and I was living in New York at the time, although I'm back in Texas again now. But the last thing any fraternity kid wants to hear is like, "Hi, I'm a reporter from Brooklyn, and I'm here to hear about," So like, at first it was not easy, but it was a few things. One is, there are thousands of pages of police files, court documents, investigative sort of, all of the sort of breadcrumbs that come from everything, the lawyers and the police and the, all of the law enforcement stuff. So once you read all that, the DEA files, the interviews, and that's not easy to find, but you will find the right lawyer, the right source who might be able to give you a little bit, and you find another who can give you some more. Once you find all that stuff, then you do an interview and the person you're talking to realizes, oh, this person knows a lot more than, someone who's just starting out. And so there's a sense of momentum, right? They think like, oh, the story's actually happening. This person already kind of knows this much. I guess I can fill in the blank or correct this misconception. So that was part of it. I think another part of it was being a guy from the South who had been in a fraternity. I think that kind of helped, you learn how to code switch, as it were, and kind of talk in Southern bro a little bit. But I think the real thing is when it came out that Sony Pictures had optioned this story to be a movie, all of a sudden people started reaching out because, they want to play themselves in the movie, or they think, wow, this story could have been a movie. And so all of a sudden my phone just started getting texts from numbers I didn't know, basically saying, oh, let me tell you about, getting waterboarded during pledging or whatever it was. And yeah, I do think that was a factor as well.
In your book, you do talk about hazing extensively. You also do point out that certain fraternities does not allow that, but doesn't mean that it still doesn't happen. There was some pretty gross stuff in there, waterboarding, drinking of your own urine, things of that nature. How do you feel about hazing? Is it still there? I'm sure that it is, but how did they manage to hide that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually very hard to regulate because so much of it takes place way off campus, sometimes like deep in the woods, or on someone's, off-campus apartment. And there's such a culture of secrecy around it. There will often be sort of a university review where they'll call in everyone from the fraternity and go, I know you got hazed, like, tell me what happened. And they all are like, no, sir, I don't know what you're talking about, because there is this culture of secrecy. Also, I do think you'll find alumni in a lot of these chapters who basically are like, well, I went through it, and I want my son to go through it too. And they'll sort of support, they'll bring in the lawyer or, whatever it is. But I think the biggest thing is actually that guys who go through this, even the really bad hazing, even the guy who got waterboarded, even the people who had to drink their own, vomit, they all say they would do it again. And a lot of them say they actually enjoyed hazing. There are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, Stockholm syndrome probably being one of them. There might be something almost kinky about it as well. But I think also these guys really do believe in sort of the trauma bonding of it all. And they'll say, these are my brothers now because we went through this together. And, for better or for worse, I think often for worse, this is a pattern that has existed for a very long time. You can read Plato, and Plato writes about hazing at the academy, and you can look in records from the Middle Ages, and they were paddling people and making them wear costumes. And British boarding schools, or Harvard in the early 20th century, it's really gone on with elite men for a very long time. And it's almost this sort of like, if you want to join the club of the ruling class, you got to sort of be put down for a while. And that's a very hard thing to break.
I think one of the most frustrating things for me doing true crime is that certain people that should be locked up for life never see jail time. And your book did not disappoint in that, because you kind of call the good old boy network or conspiracy, because after the arrests were made, many of the boys that were arrested, they got let go. Fraternities returned to the way that it was.
Yeah.
And of course, as you stated, the police never revealed that they found millions of Xanax pills. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, in some ways in our day and age, you sort of develop this sort of a defense mechanism or callousness where you're sort of like, oh, well, nothing can shock me anymore. Like, who cares or whatever. But I do think, even knowing what we know about our justice system, I was surprised the extent to which there really were no consequences. And even I set out to write a book that's kind of about the consequence of a life without consequences. Like, this stuff starts early. You get a DUI, your parents take care of it. You, get a simple marijuana possession charge. Your lawyer makes it go away. You burn down a cabin and alumni step in and pay for it. And, if you can keep getting away with things, you're going to just keep getting away with things, and you'll try crazier and crazier stuff. But you sort of think in your back of your head, well, at some point, you're going to do something where there will be real consequences. And that's sort of the moral of the story, right? But instead, after all these drug busts, and, ultimately there were dozens and dozens of boys involved in this trafficking network. As of now, there's only one who's in prison from the College of Charleston. And KA, one of the fraternities, was kicked off campus, but came back 4 years later. SAE never left at all. Most of the guys got suspended since his probation or weren't charged at all. And you can even go on the Instagram pages of College of Charleston, SAE, and KA right now. They're public, and they're posting wild videos from, this semester's parties. And so, I mean, even that surprised me. I saw that the other day. I was my plane had taxied and I had some time to kill, and I literally was just like, oh, I'll see if these Instagrams, like, what's going on. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this book came out in November and they're posting things, like the next week. But it's always a reminder as a journalist that you don't overestimate your own impact. But yeah, it really is in many ways a culture without consequences.
So I feel, and you can correct me, that goes to the money and influence, because some of the things that you wrote in your book, if I went to just a local college and pull half of this stuff, I wouldn't have got away with it. We would have been in jail, prosecuted, all over the news.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think maybe because of the money and the influence and the power of fraternities, they don't want that stuff to get out, because do they feel that will, cause people not to want to pledge or just make the college overall look bad?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is like, yeah, you want to protect the brand, right? And that's certainly a concern for any college, any Greek organization. And then on the individual level, if your parents can afford to hire the best lawyers, then all of a sudden you got the guy who is at the country club with the judge, playing golf or going sailing or whatever it is. Or at the very least, you have someone who is going to put together the best briefs and give you the best arguments and, all the rest. And it really can make all the difference in the world.
Do you consider yourself to be a whistleblower, or does people look at you like that?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because in some ways, I think a lot of people in Greek life were very worried about the amount of Xanax they were seeing, because it's an incredibly addictive drug, right? It's one of two drugs where you can die of withdrawals. If you try to quit Xanax cold turkey and you have a really bad dependency, your brain basically can create a seizure for itself to try to get you to take it again. It's that addictive. And I really didn't talk to anyone in this book, and I don't really have anyone in my life who doesn't know someone whose life has been derailed by this stuff. And, most of us at this point also know someone who's thought they were taking Xanax and died of a fentanyl overdose. And so I think in that way, there's sort of this shared sense of like, we need to get this story out. And so in that sense, people inside and outside the bubble might not see me as a whistleblower. But in terms of, the hazing and the the dealing and a lot of other things, I think there are people who they don't want that out. And so I don't see myself as a whistleblower. I just kind of was, as cliche as it is, I was just trying to hold a mirror up to what I was seeing. But then the mirror I grabbed happened to be, smeared with cocaine. So that's kind of what it was.
You talk a lot about Mikey Smith in your book.
Yeah.
It looks like he's pretty much the ringleader. What can you give the audience about that without giving too much of the book away that makes them want to go read about Mikey Smith?
Sure. So Mikey is, sort of the main character of the book. And when he arrives at the College of Charleston, he had just finished a 7-inch growth spurt. Up until his 18th birthday, he was 5'0". His voice hadn't changed. And in his case, being the shorter than every girl in his high school and having a voice as high as them, he developed this sort of a preternatural swagger. He really had learned to sort of compensate for his height and voice by just this kind of insane charisma. And then when he showed up to College of Charleston, he combined that with a nice little fake ID business, and he made friends pretty quickly. But didn't come from as much money as the really wealthy kids at College of Charleston. You get to College of Charleston, you'll meet actual Rockefellers and Rothschilds and, people from really, really wealthy New England families like Greenwich, Connecticut, and, Westchester, places like that. And pretty quickly got involved in dealing some weed in his Southern fraternity, dropped out of school, was working as a valet boy in one of the big sort of nightclubs in Atlanta, the Tongue and Groove. Got involved in the Atlanta rap scene, and within a year was smuggling cartel quality cocaine to fraternity houses around the Southeast and bringing Xanax pills from Charleston to fraternity houses around the South and to the rap scene in Atlanta. And the story kind of got especially crazy from there.
Wow, well, it is a very well-written book. It's captivated me. There's things that I never knew, and there's some things that I did, but didn't know to the extent of that. Especially when, you was writing about people, it's like, yeah, I'll do this again. I'm sitting here going, oh, you're crazy. That's nothing I ever want to go back and experience.
Yeah.
How are you looked upon by your own fraternity now that you've written this book?
It's funny. My fraternity actually got kicked off campus right after I left for hazing, of all things. It's funny. I mean, there is a bit of, like I said, this is the sort, you don't talk about these secrets outside the family. But I think it's funny. It's like I'm 30 now, and so all my friends are, the same age. And once you've been out of it for long enough, it's like, okay, well, this isn't like, why does this have to be secret? It's just like, it's a pretty wild thing that goes on, and it explains a lot of American power. So it's probably better to talk about than to not talk about. But, it's possible some of those mean Goodreaders reviews are also from guys who are in my fraternity. Who knows? Maybe they just haven't texted me.
What advice would you give anyone who's listening today that is getting ready to go to college and they want to pledge to a fraternity?
So, the first thing, and I think, the younger generation knows this better than sort of I did when I was showing up to school, a little over 10 years ago, is never take a pill if you don't know where it came from, because, we're now at a place where the one pill kill sort of epidemic is as bad as it's ever been, and will probably continue to get worse. And so if you don't know where something's coming from, just don't take it. And, if you do want to take drugs, be testing for fentanyl and have everything you need. But in terms of the fraternity system, more broadly, I do think it's good to be prepared to know that you're going to probably be seeing a lot of wild behavior. And I think something that people don't know is that hazing kills about one student every year in America, but overdoses and sort of the general blackout culture of fraternities kills way more, in terms of like everything from falling off roofs and balconies to drug overdoses to car accidents when you've been drinking, alcohol poisoning. That's when you're really getting the danger of fraternities. Hazing is, you're more likely to, probably get attacked by a shark than you are to die of hazing, or it's probably about similar. But if you're in a fraternity, you are going to be, you very well might be around some pretty insane chemical abuse if you're in one of the more crazy fraternities. And so, prepare yourself for that, and maybe look for if that's not something you want, then look for the chapters that are not known for being the go out 6 nights a week type.
Why should people go out and buy a copy and read Among the Bros, a Fraternity Crime Story?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to give your own book accolades, but I do think it's a page turning wild story with what I find to be pretty unbelievable characters and more twists than you might even find in fiction. Certainly more absurdity and sort of unbelievable sort of turns than you might find in fiction. But also at the same time, if you're looking for, like that sort of kind of fun, crazy, juicy beach read, that reading is available. But also if you're the kind of person who wants to understand how American power works and what goes on, in the basements of sort of our ruling class and what they learn and kind of what they get away with, this book does that too, I think.
So in closing, what do you want people to take away from this book when they read it?
Yeah, so I think it's a few things. We already talked a little bit about the consequence of a world without consequences, but I do think that's really something worth thinking about and seeing it play out. There's a song fraternity guys, especially in Texas, love called "The Road Goes On Forever and the Party Never Ends." That's kind of this book. It's the party is indestructible. No matter what happens, these guys, the party continues. Even the funerals are parties. So I think that's something to know. And then the other is, I do think it's interesting if you think of the sort of defining drug of different generations. You might associate the 60s with weed or maybe acid. You might associate the 80s with cocaine or crack cocaine. I think it's pretty fascinating that the drug of my generation is an anti-anxiety tranquilizer designed for panic attacks. What is it about this generation and this time in our lives or this time in this world that makes people want to black out on something designed for really profound anxiety? And what's the sort of anxiety coursing through this world?
Is there anything you'd like to say to any of your readers or fans out there who may be listening today?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to my website, max-marshall.com, my email's on there. So feel free to give me a shout, and happy to talk.
Well, Max, I really thank you for joining me today. It has been extremely enlightening. Your book is a page turner. I will get through it today. I was almost done, but I had to go back and reread a whole lot of parts because I'm like, I can't believe this stuff is happening. So, but thank you, man. This book is amazing. Anytime you want to come back, you got my information. Let me know.
Awesome.
You're always welcome to come back.
Cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And thanks for reading Among the Bros.
Thank you. All right, guys, that was Max Marshall. You can get your copy of Among the Bros, a Fraternity Crime Story from HarperCollins, Amazon, or anywhere books are sold. The links will be in the description of this episode. So once again, we thank Max. Go read this book, guys. You won't be disappointed. It is getting great reviews from everywhere. And if you really want to know some things that's happening behind the Greek walls, this is definitely the book for you. Once again, I thank you for joining me today. I know you have many options in true crime and interview podcasts. I'm grateful that I am one of them. And I remind you, as always stay humbled. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion can go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. One link to the link tree has it all. Feel free to drop us a line at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Arslip. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild and David McClam. Theme music, Legendary, by New Alchemist. Introduction and ending credits by Jackie Voice. See you next time on True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.